Welcome back to True Crime Stories by Pam. On Christmas Eve 2010, while families across America were celebrating, wrapping last-minute presents and waiting for Santa, something horrifying was happening in a quiet driveway in Longview, Texas. A black Chevrolet Tahoe sat in the driveway with the engine running. Inside was a woman, and she was dead. But this wasn't just any death. This was the beginning of one of the strangest identity theft mysteries in American history. The woman's name was Erica Ruff. At least that's what everyone thought. But after she died, her family would discover something shocking. Ruff didn't exist. He was completely made up. The woman they knew and loved was actually someone else. Someone who had been hiding for over 20 years. I am Pam, and this is the unbelievable true story of the woman who stole a dead child's name. Let me take you back to that Christmas Eve. Blake Ruff's father opened his garage door to take out the trash. That's when he saw it. A black SUV parked in his driveway. The engine was still running. The headlights were on. He walked closer and looked inside. What he saw would haunt him forever. His former daughter-in-law, Lori, was slumped over in the driver's seat. Blood everywhere. A shotgun next to her. He immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they found Lori had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It was ruled a suicide right away. But here's what made this case different. Inside the car, police found 2 handwritten suicide notes. One was 11 pages long and addressed to her ex-husband Blake. The other was for her daughter with instructions to open it on her 18th birthday. The police opened both letters hoping they would explain why Lori had taken her own life. Maybe she was depressed. Maybe she was sick. Maybe there was some terrible secret. But when investigators read those letters, they were completely confused. The letters didn't make any sense. They were full of rambling thoughts, disconnected sentences, strange ideas that jumped from topic to topic with no clear meaning. One officer described them as writings from a clearly disturbed person. The letters gave no explanation for her death. No goodbye message that made sense. No details about her past. Nothing that would help anyone understand who Lori really was. Or why she did this. It was like reading the diary of someone who was completely lost in their own mind. But nobody knew yet that these confusing letters were hiding an even bigger mystery. Blake Ruff was devastated. He and Lori had been married for 6 years before separating just months earlier. They had a 2-year-old daughter together. Even though they were divorced, Blake never imagined this would happen. He thought maybe after some time apart, they could work things out. Now she was gone forever. And he had to plan a funeral for the mother of his child. But Blake's parents, Tom and Nancy Ruff, had always felt something was wrong about Lori. From the very first time Blake brought her home to meet them, they sensed she was hiding something. She was secretive. She wouldn't answer basic questions about her past. She claimed her parents were dead and she had no siblings. No family at all. Seemed strange. But Blake was in love. And when you're in love, sometimes you don't see the red flags. After Lori's funeral, Blake and his parents drove to her house in Leonard, Texas. They wanted to collect some of her belongings. Maybe find photos for their granddaughter. Maybe understand what had happened. When they walked inside, they were shocked. The house was a disaster. Dirty dishes were piled everywhere. Laundry was stacked up in corners. Trash covered the floors. Shredded papers were scattered around like confetti. It looked like Lori had been having some kind of mental breakdown in the weeks before her death. But then Blake's father found something interesting. In the back of a bedroom closet hidden under some clothes, was a locked metal box. A strong box. Blake remembered that box. Lori had always told him to never touch it. To never open it. She said it contained private papers that were none of his business. But now Lori was gone. And Blake needed answers. Blake and his father got a screwdriver. They pried open the locked box. And what they found inside changed everything. There were dozens of documents, birth certificates, social security cards, driver's licenses. but none of them said Lori Erica Ruff. The names on these documents were completely different. There was paperwork for someone named Becky Sue Turner, documents for someone named Lori Erica Kennedy, identity cards from different states. Blake's hands were shaking as he looked through the papers. One document was a court order from 1988 showing a legal name change. Someone named Becky Sue Turner had changed their name to Lori Erica Kennedy. But wait. Blake had married Lori Erica Kennedy. She changed her last name to Ruff when they got married. So who was Becky Sue Turner? And why did his wife have all these fake documents? Blake felt sick to his stomach. He realized he might not have ever known his wife at all. The most shocking document in that box was a birth certificate for Becky Sue Turner. Born July 18, 1969 in Bakersfield, California. The certificate looked official. It had stamps and signatures. It looked completely real. Blake immediately searched for information about Becky Sue Turner online. What he found made his blood run cold. Becky Sue Turner was real. But she was dead. Becky Sue Turner had died in a house fire in 1971 in Fife, Washington. She was only 2 years old. She died along with 2 of her sisters. It was a tragic accident that had happened almost 40 years earlier. So how did Blake's ex-wife have Becky's birth certificate? And why? The answer was becoming terrifyingly clear. Lori had stolen the identity of a dead toddler. She had used a dead child's birth certificate to create a whole new life. As Blake kept digging through the box, he found more strange things. There were pieces of paper with random scribblings on them. One paper had the words North Hollywood Police written on it. Another had 402 months written down. That's over 33 years. Was that a prison sentence length? There was also a name written down. Ben Perkins. Blake looked him up and found out Ben Perkins was a lawyer in Los Angeles. What did all this mean? Was Lori running from the police? Had she committed some crime years ago? Was she trying to avoid going to prison? The more Blake learned, the less he understood. Every answer just led to more questions. He realized that the woman he had married, the woman he had a child with, was a complete stranger. He didn't know her real name. He didn't know where she came from. He didn't know anything about her real life. Blake started thinking back to his marriage, looking for clues he might have missed. And he remembered something. In the last year before their separation, Lori had become increasingly angry at his parents. She would get upset over tiny things. If his mother asked her a simple question about her childhood, Lori would explode in rage. She accused Blake's parents of being nosy, of trying to control her, of not respecting her privacy. It got so bad that Lori eventually said she didn't want Blake's parents to see their granddaughter anymore. No visits. No phone calls. Nothing. Blake's parents were heartbroken. They loved their granddaughter. They couldn't understand why Lori was being so cruel. But now it all made sense. Lori wasn't protecting her privacy. She was protecting her secret. Every question was a threat. Every conversation was dangerous. One slip up and her whole fake life could come crashing down. Blake sat in Lori's destroyed house, holding these fake documents, and he felt his entire world falling apart. He thought about their wedding day. How beautiful she looked. How happy he was. He thought about the birth of their daughter. How Lori had cried tears of joy. Were any of those moments real? Or was it all just part of her act? Was their entire marriage built on lies? The worst part was realizing he had a child with someone he didn't even know. His daughter's mother was a ghost. A made-up person. Blake didn't know his daughter's real family history. He didn't know where Lori actually came from. He didn't know if his daughter had aunts, uncles, grandparents somewhere who didn't even know she existed. Blake's father put his hand on his son's shoulder. They both knew what they had to do. They had to call the police. They had to find out who Lori really was. Blake contacted the police and handed over all the documents from the lockbox. Investigators started searching for any records connected to Lori Erica Ruff. They looked for birth records, school records, medical records, anything that would tell them who she really was. But they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like Lori Erica Ruff had appeared out of thin air in 1988 when she legally changed her name from Becky Sue Turner. But they already knew Becky Sue Turner was a dead toddler. So who had walked into that courthouse in Dallas in 1988? Who had stood in front of a judge and legally changed their name to Lori Erica Kennedy? The police ran Lori's fingerprints through every database they had. FBI records, Homeland Security, state criminal records. Nothing matched. They tried facial recognition software comparing her photos to missing persons reports. No matches. They were completely stuck. In September 2011, 9 months after Lori's death, the case caught the attention of the Social Security Administration. They assigned a special investigator named Joe Velling to figure out who this woman really was. Velling was a seasoned investigator who had solved complex identity theft cases before. But he had never seen anything like this. The way Lori had erased her past was almost professional. Like something a spy would do. Velling started calling Lori's case by a code name, Jane Doe, because that's essentially what she was. An unidentified person. He opened a file and began what would become a 6-year investigation. 6 years of dead ends. 6 years of frustration. 6 years of trying to give a name to a ghost. Little did Velling know. This case would become an obsession. Not just for him but for thousands of people around the world who would try to help solve this mystery. To understand this story we need to go back in time. Back to 1986. To a place called King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. This is where our mystery really begins. This is where a teenage girl made a decision that would change her entire life. A decision to run away and never come back. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you about this girl's life before she vanished. Her name was Kimberly Maria McLean. She was born on October 16, 1968 in the Philadelphia area. She grew up in a regular middle-class family. Her father James was a carpenter and a volunteer firefighter. Her mother Deanne took care of the home. Kimberly had a younger sister. From the outside everything looked normal. A typical American family. But inside that house, things were falling apart. When Kimberly was a teenager her parents' marriage started to break down. They fought constantly. They couldn't get along anymore. Eventually, James and Deanne got divorced. Kimberly and her sister stayed with their mother. Not long after the divorce, Deanne remarried a man named Robert Becker. The family moved to Wyncote, Pennsylvania. Deanne thought this fresh start would be good for everyone. But Kimberly hated it. She didn't like her stepfather. She didn't want a new family. She was angry at her mother for remarrying so quickly. She felt like her whole world had been turned upside down and nobody asked how she felt about it. Kimberly became more and more unhappy. She would argue with her mother and stepfather constantly. The tension in the house was unbearable. Something had to give. In the fall of 1986, when Kimberly was 18 years old, she had a massive fight with her mother and stepfather. We don't know exactly what the fight was about, but according to family members, it was bad. Really bad. The kind of fight where things are said that can't be taken back. After that fight, Kimberly made a decision. She was leaving, and she was never coming back. Kimberly packed a bag and walked out the door. She told her mother not to look for her. Not to try to find her. She was done with this family. She was starting over. Kimberly's mother Deanne was heartbroken, but she was also angry. If Kimberly wanted to leave, fine. Let her go. Let her see how hard the real world is. Deanne figured Kimberly would come crawling back in a few weeks when she ran out of money. But Kimberly never came back. Ever. After Kimberly left home she stayed in King of Prussia for a little while. But she knew she couldn't stay close to her family. They might find her. They might try to make her come home. She needed to disappear completely. She needed a new identity. And that's when Kimberly had an idea. A terrible idea. She would steal someone else's identity. Someone who would never notice. Someone who was already dead. Kimberly started searching through death records and obituaries. She was looking for a child who had died young. Someone close to her own age. Someone who died in a different state than where they were born. This was important because back in the 1980s, before computers connected everything, it was much harder to check records across state lines. And that's when Kimberly found her. Becky Sue Turner. Born in California. Died in Washington. Perfect. On May 20, 1988, Kimberly requested Becky Sue Turner's birth certificate from Bakersfield, California, where Becky had been born. Since Kimberly was roughly the same age Becky would have been if she had lived, the request didn't raise any red flags. She simply claimed she needed her birth certificate and they mailed it to her. Just like that, Kimberly had a legitimate birth certificate for someone else. The next step was getting an ID. Kimberly traveled to Idaho. She went to the DMV and presented Becky Sue Turner's birth certificate. The workers at the DMV had no reason to doubt her. She got a state ID card in Becky's name. Now she had a birth certificate and a valid government ID. But Kimberly wasn't done yet. She moved to Texas and did something very smart. She legally changed her name. On July 5, 1988, Kimberly walked into a courthouse in Dallas, posing as Becky Sue Turner, and asked a judge to change her name to Lori Erica Kennedy. Why did Kimberly legally change the name? Because this was the genius part of her plan. By legally changing from Becky Sue Turner to Lori Erica Kennedy, she created a paper trail that looked completely legitimate. Any future background checks would show that Lori Erica Kennedy was a real person who legally changed her name. The fact that she had started as Becky Sue Turner, who was actually a dead toddler, would be buried in old records that nobody would bother to check. 1 week after the name change, Kimberly applied for a social security number under her new name, Lori Erica Kennedy. And she got it. She now had a legitimate social security number. A birth certificate. A state ID. Everything she needed to completely erase Kimberly McLean from existence. Kimberly McLean was gone. Now there was only Lori Erica Kennedy. And Lori was going to build a whole new life. For the next 15 years, Lori Erica Kennedy built what looked like a normal life. She got a Texas driver's license. She got her GED. She enrolled in Dallas County Community College. She worked various jobs. She lived in California for a while, then Idaho, then Las Vegas, before eventually settling back in Texas. She dated. She had relationships. To everyone who knew her, she was just a regular woman trying to make her way in the world. In 1997, Lori graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington with a degree in business administration. She was proud of that degree. She had worked hard for it. She had taken out student loans and paid her own way through college. On paper, Lori Erica Kennedy was a success story. A young woman who had built a life for herself through education and hard work. But of course, none of it was real. It was all built on a lie. A lie that started with a dead child's birth certificate. In 2003, Lori was living in Carrollton, Texas. She was in her mid-30s, though officially, her birth certificate said she was only 34. Lori attended a Bible study class at a local church. That's where she met him. John Blakely Ruff. Everyone called him Blake. He was handsome, kind, and came from a very wealthy family in East Texas. His parents owned a successful business. They lived in a beautiful home. Blake was exactly the kind of man Lori had been hoping to meet. Blake was immediately attracted to Lori. She had long dark hair and striking hazel eyes. He was tall, about 5'10". He seemed mysterious and interesting. When Blake asked about her past, Lori told him a sad story. She said her parents had died when she was young. She said she had no siblings. No family at all. She said her father had been a failed stockbroker and they had had a difficult life. She told Blake she had destroyed all her family photos because the memories were too painful. Blake felt sorry for Lori. Here was this beautiful, educated woman who had been through so much tragedy, who had no family, who was all alone in the world. He wanted to take care of her. He wanted to give her the family she'd never had. After just 1 year of dating, Blake proposed. Lori said yes. In January 2004, they got married at a courthouse. It was a small, simple wedding. Just them and a few witnesses. Blake's parents, Tom and Nancy, attended the wedding, but they had serious doubts. Nancy tried to get to know Lori better before the wedding. She asked simple questions. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? Do you have any old friends we could invite? But Lori would get defensive and angry. She accused Nancy of being nosy, of not trusting her. Blake told his parents to back off. He loved Lori, and that's all that mattered. So Tom and Nancy stayed quiet, even though something felt very wrong. After the wedding, Blake and Lori moved to Leonard, Texas, a small town about 60 miles from Dallas. Blake wanted to be closer to his parents who lived in Longview, about 45 miles away. He was close with his family and wanted them to be part of his marriage. But Lori made this very difficult. She didn't like when Blake's parents visited. She didn't want to go to family gatherings. She always had an excuse to avoid spending time with her in-laws. When they did have to spend time together, Lori would sit quietly and barely speak. If Nancy asked her a direct question, Lori would give short, vague answers. She never shared any real information about herself. Blake's parents started to notice something strange. Lori seemed to have no past. No stories from childhood. No memories of school. No old friends. It was like her life had started the day she met Blake. They tried to talk to Blake about it, but he wouldn't listen. He thought they were just being overprotective. Blake and Lori wanted to have children, but Lori had trouble getting pregnant. They tried for months with no success. So they decided to try IVF, which is when doctors help a woman get pregnant using medical procedures. It's expensive and difficult, but Blake was willing to do whatever it took. During the IVF process, Lori told the doctors she was 35 years old. But investigator Joe Velling would later doubt this. He believed Lori was actually older, probably born between 1960 and 1968, not 1969, like her fake birth certificate claimed. After several attempts, the IVF finally worked. Lori got pregnant. Blake was overjoyed. His parents were thrilled about becoming grandparents. In 2008, Lori gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Blake thought this baby would bring them all closer together. He thought becoming a mother would soften Lori, make her more open to family. But the opposite happened. Having a baby made Lori even more paranoid and secretive than before. After the baby was born, Lori became extremely protective. She didn't want Blake's parents to visit. She claimed they were trying to take over, trying to tell her how to raise her own child. Blake's parents were confused and hurt. They just wanted to see their granddaughter. They wanted to help. But Lori saw every offer of help as a threat. She started having panic attacks. She would accuse Blake's family of plotting against her. Blake tried to keep the peace. He loved his wife and he loved his parents. He was caught in the middle. But Lori's behavior kept getting worse. She would wake up in the middle of the night convinced that Blake's parents were going to take the baby away. She talked about moving far away where they could never find her. Blake started to realize that something was seriously wrong with his wife. This wasn't normal new mother anxiety. This was something deeper. Something darker. The fights between Blake and Lori became more frequent and more intense. Lori would scream at Blake for hours. She accused him of loving his parents more than her, of choosing them over his own family. Blake tried to reason with her. He tried to calm her down, but nothing worked. Lori was spiraling. She stopped taking care of the house. Dishes piled up. Laundry went unwashed. The once neat home became a disaster zone. Neighbors started to notice that Lori and her daughter looked thin. Too thin. Like they weren't eating enough. One neighbor said she would see Lori pacing back and forth outside the house, talking to herself, rambling about things that didn't make sense. She looked like she was having a nervous breakdown. Blake knew he had to do something. He suggested marriage counseling. Maybe a professional could help them work through their problems. Lori reluctantly agreed. Blake and Lori attended several marriage counseling sessions. But they didn't help. If anything, they made things worse. In the sessions, the counselor would ask Lori about her past, about her family, about her childhood, and Lori would shut down completely. She refused to talk about it. She said it was private, that it was none of the counselor's business. The counselor explained that understanding someone's past is important for understanding their present behavior. But Lori wouldn't budge. After a few failed sessions, Blake made a heartbreaking decision. He couldn't live like this anymore. The constant fighting, the paranoia, the chaos. It wasn't healthy for him or for their daughter. In 2010, Blake filed for divorce. He moved back in with his parents in Longview. Lori stayed in Leonard with their daughter. Blake hoped that maybe some time apart would help, that maybe Lori would get help for whatever was going on with her. But he had no idea how bad things were about to get. After Blake moved out, Lori completely fell apart. She started sending him harassing emails. Dozens of them. Sometimes in the middle of the night. The emails were long, rambling, and angry. She accused Blake and his parents of destroying her life, of ruining everything. She made threats. She said things that terrified Blake. He saved all the emails in case he needed them for the custody case. Lori also started causing problems during custody exchanges. When Blake would come to pick up their daughter for his visitation time, Lori would create a scene. She would yell at him in front of the child. She would refuse to let the little girl go. Blake's parents had to be there to help make sure things stayed calm. At one point, Lori even stole a set of house keys from Blake's parents' home. They had to change all their locks. They were genuinely scared of what Lori might do. The harassment got so bad that Blake's parents had to file a cease and desist order. This is a legal document that tells someone they have to stop their harassing behavior or face serious consequences. The order was issued just days before Christmas 2010. Lori received the legal papers and something inside her snapped. She knew she had lost. Her marriage was over. Blake's family had won. And worse. There was a custody case coming up. Lawyers would be involved. Judges would ask questions. They would demand documents. They would investigate her past. This was Lori's worst nightmare. For 22 years, she had successfully hidden her true identity. Nobody had discovered her secret. But now, with lawyers and courts involved, her past would be exposed. They would find out she wasn't who she claimed to be. They would discover the identity theft. She might go to prison. And even worse, she might lose her daughter forever. Lori saw no way out. In her mind, there was only one solution. After Lori's death, investigator Joe Velling took on the case with determination. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. But he had solved difficult cases before. He started with what he knew. Lori had used the name Becky Sue Turner starting in 1988. She had changed her name to Lori Erica Kennedy. She had lived in multiple states. There had to be some trail. Some clue. Something she had left behind. Velling tracked down people who had known Lori. Former coworkers. Former classmates from college. Even a man she had briefly dated in the 1990s. They all described Lori the same way. Mysterious. Secretive. Guarded. The man she dated said Lori had more problems than he could deal with. One person told Velling that Lori had worked as a dancer at a Dallas nightclub while she was in college. But even these people who had spent time with Lori knew almost nothing about her real past. Velling focused on the social security number Lori had obtained in 1988. He traced where it was used. What jobs she had held. Where she had lived. Where she had filed taxes. The social security trail showed Lori had lived quietly and legally. She paid her taxes. She had never been arrested. She had never been in any kind of trouble with the law. Whatever she was running from, it apparently wasn't criminal activity. At least not anything recent. But here's what bothered Baffling. Lori's identity theft was too good. Too professional. Back in the 1980s, before the internet, it was harder to commit identity fraud. But it was also harder to get caught. So, the way Lori had done it showed sophistication. She knew exactly which documents to get. And in what order. She knew to choose a child who was born in one state. And died in another. She knew to legally change the name to create a legitimate paper trail. This wasn't amateur work. Someone had taught her how to do this. Or she had help. Baffling investigated Becky Sue Turner's death more carefully. Becky had died on December 29, 1971 in a house fire in Fife, Washington. She was only 2 years old. 2 of her sisters also died in that same fire. It was a horrible tragedy. The Turner family had lost 3 daughters in one night. Baffling wondered if there was any connection between Lori and the Turner family. But he found nothing. No connection at all. Lori had simply picked Becky's name from death records. This was one of the most heartbreaking parts of the case for Baffling. Becky Sue Turner was a real child who had died. A little girl who never got to grow up. And Lori had stolen her identity. Used her name. Lived the life that Becky never got to live. The Turner family had suffered enough losing their daughters. Now they had to find out that one of their daughters' identities had been stolen by a stranger. It added another layer of sadness to an already tragic story. By 2013, 3 years after Lori's death, Baffling was still no closer to identifying her. He had hit every dead end imaginable. That's when the Seattle Times newspaper decided to write a feature article about the case. They called it, The Mystery of Jane Doe. The Woman with No Name. When that article was published, something amazing happened. It went viral. News outlets around the world picked up the story. Suddenly, people everywhere were talking about Lori Erica Ruff. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why did she steal a dead child's identity? The article sparked enormous interest in the online web sleuth community. These are regular people who spend their free time trying to solve cold cases and mysteries. Thousands of people started investigating. They created forums. They shared theories. They dug through old records. Everyone wanted to be the one to solve the mystery of Jane Doe. The web sleuths came up with dozens of theories. Some people thought Lori was a victim of abuse who had to flee her family. Others thought she was running from a crime she had committed. Some believed she was in witness protection and had created her own fake identity when the government wouldn't help her. There were theories that she was connected to organized crime. Theories that she had killed someone. Theories that she was a spy. Every theory sounded possible. But none of them could be proven. Some web sleuths focused on those cryptic notes found in Lori's lockbox. The one that said North Hollywood Police and 402 months and Ben Perkins, the lawyer's name. Was 402 months a prison sentence? That would be over 33 years. Had Lori been involved in some serious crime in North Hollywood, California? Investigators contacted Ben Perkins, but he said he had never heard of Lori. The note was just another dead end. Another mystery with no answer. In 2015, Baffling got a call that would change everything. It was from a woman named Colleen Fitzpatrick. She was a forensic genealogist. That's someone who uses DNA and family trees to identify people. Fitzpatrick had read about Lori's case and thought she could help. She had a brilliant idea. What if they tested Lori's daughter's DNA? The little girl carried Lori's genetic code. Half of her DNA came from her father Blake. The other half came from Lori. Fitzpatrick explained that with special techniques, she could essentially subtract Blake's DNA from the daughter's DNA. What would be left would be Lori's genetic profile. Then they could use that profile to search DNA databases and find Lori's relatives. It was cutting-edge science. And it was their last hope. Blake agreed to let his daughter provide a DNA sample. The Ruff family sent saliva samples to companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. Then they waited for the results. Took months. But finally, they got a hit. The DNA results came back showing several matches. Most were distant cousins. People who shared a great-great-great-grandfather with Lori. These matches weren't close enough to identify her. But there was one match that stood out. A first cousin. Someone who shared a grandparent with Lori. His name was Michael Cassidy. And he lived near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Fitzpatrick tried to contact Michael Cassidy through the genealogy websites. But he never responded. Maybe he didn't check his messages. Maybe he thought it was spam. Fitzpatrick kept working. She built out a family tree based on the DNA matches. She traced the Cassidy family back through generations. And that's when she found something interesting. Michael Cassidy's Aunt Deanne had been married to a man named James McLean. And according to records, Deanne and James had a daughter. A daughter who would have been about Lori's age. A daughter who had disappeared. Fitzpatrick called Velling and told him the story. She believed Lori Ruff was actually Kimberly McLean from Pennsylvania. In early 2016, Joe Velling flew to Philadelphia. He was nervous. He'd been working this case for 5 years. 5 years of dead ends and frustration. He didn't even know if Fitzpatrick was right. He found the workplace of a relative in the Cassidy family. When Velling walked in, he didn't have any official ID. He was retired from the Social Security Administration by this point. He was just a regular person in a suit. He hoped they would hear him out. Velling introduced himself and asked if the person had a few minutes to hear a story. He started explaining about Lori Ruff. About the suicide. About the stolen identity. About the DNA. But he could tell his story wasn't making sense. It was too complicated. Too confusing. So Velling pulled out some photos. Pictures of Lori at different ages. He laid them on the table one by one. And then he showed the most recent driver's license photo. The one of Lori at about 40 years old. The family member looked at the photo. Their face went pale. Their hand went to their mouth. And they said something that made Velling's heart race. My God, that's Kimberly. Kimberly McLean. The teenage girl who had run away 30 years earlier and never come back. Velling couldn't believe it. After all this time. After all the searching. He'd finally found her. He'd finally given Lori Ruff her real name back. The family member told Velling everything they knew. Kimberly McLean was born on October 16, 1968. Her parents were James McLean and Deanne. James was a carpenter and volunteer firefighter. Kimberly grew up in the Philadelphia suburbs with a younger sister. When Kimberly was a teenager, her parents got divorced. Her mother Deanne remarried a man named Robert Becker. The family moved to Wyncote, Pennsylvania. And that's when everything fell apart for Kimberly. According to Kimberly's uncle Tom Cassidy, she never adjusted to the changes. She hated the new house. She hated her new school, Bishop McDevitt High School. She resented her stepfather. She was angry at her mother for remarrying so quickly. The tension in the house was constant. Kimberly and her mother fought all the time. In 1986, when Kimberly turned 18, she moved to King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. About a half hour away. She stayed there for a short time. And then one day, Kimberly told her mother she was leaving for good. Don't come after me, she warned. Don't try to find me. I'm done with this family. Deanne was upset, but she was also angry. Fine, she thought. Let Kimberly see how hard the real world is. The family assumed Kimberly would come back eventually. When she ran out of money. When she needed help. But Kimberly never came back. Deanne and James tried to find her. They even hired a private investigator. But Kimberly had disappeared completely. For 30 years, the McLean family wondered what happened to her. Baffling contacted Deanne McLean, who was now 80 years old and went by her married name, Deanne Cassidy. He told her that her daughter Kimberly had been found. But there was terrible news. Kimberly had died in 2010. She had taken her own life. Deanne was devastated. For 30 years she had hoped Kimberly was alive somewhere, living a happy life. Now she knew the truth. Kimberly was gone. Forever. To confirm the identification, Deanne agreed to take a DNA test. The results came back as a perfect match. Lori Erica Ruff was definitely Kimberly Maria McLean. On September 19, 2016, almost 6 years after Lori's death, her true identity was finally revealed to the public. News outlets around the world reported the story. The mystery was solved. But for both families, the Ruffs and the McLeans, the answers brought more pain than comfort. They had both lost someone. And they had both been robbed of so much time. Kimberly's uncle, Tom Cassidy, talked to reporters about how sad the whole situation was. He said nobody from the family was there when Kimberly graduated from college. Nobody was there when she got married. Nobody was there when she had her baby daughter. Every year on October 16th, her birthday, Lori couldn't celebrate, because celebrating would mean explaining her past. And that was the one thing she could never do. The family had tried everything to find her. When Kimberly's father James died, he left her part of his inheritance. But Kimberly never came forward to claim it. She had cut herself off so completely that she couldn't even accept money from her deceased father. It's heartbreaking to think about. If Kimberly had just stayed in touch even minimally, her life might have turned out so different. But instead, she spent over 20 years running from a past that, honestly, wasn't even that bad. Her parents got divorced. She didn't like her stepfather. That's unfortunate, but it's also pretty common. Lots of people deal with that without stealing a dead child's identity and disappearing forever. Even though we now know who Lori really was, there are still so many questions without answers. What happened during those 2 years between when Kimberly ran away in 1986 and when she stole Becky Sue Turner's identity in 1988? Where was she? What was she doing? How did she survive? And most importantly, why did an 18-year-old girl think she needed to completely erase her identity? Was she mentally ill? Was something else going on that we don't know about? Some people have suggested that maybe Kimberly was running from something more serious than just family problems. Maybe she witnessed a crime. Maybe she was involved in something dangerous. But investigator Joe Velling found no evidence of that. As far as he could tell, Kimberly was just an angry teenager who made a rash decision to run away. And then, for whatever reason, she decided she could never go back. So she built a new life. A completely fake life. And she maintained that lie for over 20 years. Looking back at Lori's behavior during her marriage, it's clear she was struggling with serious mental health issues. The paranoia. The outbursts. The inability to handle simple questions about her past. The breakdown of her house. The weight loss. These are all signs of someone in psychological distress. Some experts believe Lori may have suffered from paranoid personality disorder or severe anxiety. Living under a fake identity for so long would put enormous stress on anyone. Think about it. Every conversation was a minefield. Every new person she met was a potential threat. She couldn't talk about her childhood. She couldn't share memories. She couldn't connect with anyone on a real level, because everything about her was a lie. And the longer the lie went on, the harder it became to tell the truth. By the time she married Blake, Kimberly had been Lori for 16 years. Lori was more real to her than Kimberly was. Going back wasn't an option anymore. Blake Ruff was left to pick up the pieces. He had to explain to his young daughter as best he could that her mother's entire identity was fake. That her mother's name wasn't really Lori. That they had family in Pennsylvania they'd never met. Grandparents. An aunt. cousins. All these relatives who didn't even know the little girl existed. Blake also had to process his own feelings of betrayal. He had loved Lori. He had trusted her. And their entire relationship was built on lies. The Ruff family did reach out to the McLean Cassidy family, but it was complicated. Deanne McLean was elderly and had her own complicated feelings about everything. She had lost her daughter twice. Once when Kimberly ran away, and again when she found out Kimberly had died. The two families decided to respect each other's privacy. They didn't need a big reunion. They just needed time to heal. Both families had been through enough. Throughout this entire story we need to remember another victim. Becky Sue Turner. The 2-year-old girl who died in a fire in 1971. Becky never got to live her life. She died as a toddler. And then, decades later, her identity was stolen by a stranger. The Turner family had already suffered the unimaginable tragedy of losing 3 daughters in a fire. And then they had to learn that one of their daughters' names had been used for identity theft. Becky Sue Turner deserved better. She deserved to be remembered for who she was. A little girl who died too young. Not as a name that was stolen. Her family released a statement saying they appreciated finally knowing what happened with Becky's birth certificate. But they asked for privacy. They didn't want to be part of this story. They just wanted to remember their daughter in peace. And they deserved that. This case shows the power of people working together to solve mysteries. Thousands of web sleuths spent countless hours researching Lori's case. They shared theories. They dug through records. They connected dots. Even though they didn't ultimately solve it, their attention kept the case alive. Their interest kept pressure on investigators. And their work showed that regular people can make a difference in cold cases. Colleen Fitzpatrick, the forensic genealogist who finally cracked the case, said she spent hundreds of hours on this. She wasn't paid. She did it because she wanted to help. Because she had the skills to potentially solve this mystery. And in the end she succeeded. Her innovative use of DNA technology opened up a whole new way of identifying people. Since then, forensic genealogy has been used to solve many other cold cases, including identifying murder victims and catching serial killers. The case of Lori Erica Ruff teaches us important lessons about identity theft and its consequences. What Lori did was illegal. Stealing someone's identity, even a deceased child's identity, is a federal crime. If Lori had been caught while she was alive, she could have faced serious prison time. But beyond the legal issues, think about the human cost. Blake Ruff married someone who didn't exist. Their daughter has a mother she never really knew. And Kimberly McLean's family spent 30 years not knowing if she was alive or dead. Not knowing if she was safe or in danger. Not being able to be part of her life. Not meeting their granddaughter. All of that pain was caused by one teenager's decision to run away and never look back. One decision that spiraled into decades of lies and eventually ended in suicide. It's a tragedy on so many levels. One thing to note is that what Lori did in 1988 would be much harder to do today. Back then, records weren't computerized. Different states didn't share information easily. You could request a birth certificate by mail and nobody would question it. But now, everything is connected. Databases talk to each other. When you apply for a social security number, the system checks if that birth certificate belongs to someone who's still alive or who died. In 2003, the Social Security Administration created the Death Master File, a database of everyone who has died. This makes it much harder to use a deceased person's identity. There are also better security features on driver's licenses and other ID documents. Facial recognition technology. Biometric scanning. The world Lori operated in, where you could disappear and reinvent yourself, doesn't really exist anymore. Which in some ways is good. It prevents identity theft. But it also means people who might legitimately need to escape dangerous situations have fewer options. I think a lot about what was going through Lori's mind in those final weeks before her death. She knew her secret was about to come out. The custody case would have exposed everything. Lawyers would investigate her. Judges would ask questions. Her fake identity would crumble. And then what? Prison? Losing her daughter? Being exposed as a fraud to everyone who knew her? For someone who had spent over 20 years protecting this secret, the thought of it all coming out must have been terrifying. But here's what's so sad. If Lori had just told the truth, things probably would have been okay. Yes, she would have faced legal consequences for the identity theft. But she hadn't hurt anyone. She hadn't stolen money. She'd just been trying to live a quiet life. With a good lawyer, he might have gotten probation. She would have kept her daughter. Her family would have finally known the truth. But Lori couldn't see that. In her mind, exposure meant the end of everything. So she chose a different ending. A permanent one. Today, Lori's daughter is a teenager. She's being raised by Blake and his family. She knows the truth about her mother now. She knows her mother's real name was Kimberly McLean. She knows about the family in Pennsylvania. How she deals with all of this is private, but you have to imagine it's incredibly difficult. Your mother kills herself. Then you find out your mother wasn't even who you thought she was. That's a lot for any person to process, let alone a child. Blake has reportedly said he doesn't want his daughter to define herself by her mother's choices. She's her own person. She's not responsible for what Lori did. She's not responsible for the lies. She's an innocent child who lost her mother in the worst possible way. And hopefully she can grow up with the love and support she needs to build a healthy life. A life where she doesn't have to hide. Where she doesn't have to lie. Where she can just be herself. The story of Lori Erica Ruff, or Kimberly McLean, is one of the strangest and saddest cases I've ever covered. A teenage girl runs away from home over a family dispute. Instead of just moving to another city and starting fresh with her real name, she decides to completely erase her identity. She steals a dead child's name. She builds an elaborate fake life. She gets married and has a baby. And then, when her secret is about to be exposed, she ends her own life. It's a tragedy that didn't have to happen. What haunts me most is thinking about all the what-ifs. What if Kimberly had just stayed in touch with her family? Even minimally. What if she had used her real name and just moved somewhere new? What if she had gotten therapy for whatever was troubling her? What if she had trusted Blake enough to tell him the truth before they got married? Any of those choices might have led to a different ending. But Kimberly made the choices she made. And they led her to that driveway in Longview on Christmas Eve 2010. And now two families have to live with the consequences forever. If you found this story as fascinating and heartbreaking as I did, kindly hit that like button. Subscribe to True Crime Stories by Pam for more incredible cases. And let me know in the comments, what do you think? Do you think Kimberly was running from something more than just family problems? Do you think there's still more to this story that we don't know? Thanks for watching. My name is Pam. Stay safe out there. And remember, the truth always comes out eventually. Boys.